Welcome to the Blackhawks Breakaway Podcast on CHSN, brought to you by Toyota. Toyota has more all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive vehicles than any other brand. Find yours and shine on. Toyota, let's go places. With Charlie Roumeliotis, I'm Pat Boyle. Blackhawks are back in Chicago after dropping 2 on the left coast in Seattle, 3-1 loss. Saturday night in Vancouver, 4-1. Both tight games, empty netters late in both. Offense is still struggling. Last 5 games, each regulation is only provided 1 goal for the Blackhawks. And the story or the subplot in Saturday's game was that Taylor Hall was a healthy scratch for the first time this season. And just initially, your thoughts on seeing that on Saturday as you prepared to do your pregame show?
Yeah, a little bit surprised by it. But then I was kind of looking at some of the forwards that have been healthy scratched by the Blackhawks this season. And it's basically everyone but the top guys. You know, Ryan Donato had been a healthy scratch earlier in the season. Lucas Reichel was a healthy scratch for the first 4 games. Philip Kurashev, Craig Smith, Pat Maroon, Andreas Athanasiou, who's now down in the minors. Ilya Mikheyev was a healthy scratch. So it's kind of just this rotation of Luke Richardson trying to find the right line combinations, but also wanting to give everyone a fair shot. And I think the Taylor Hall one kind of caught us all by surprise because there was no real. It wasn't like he dropped from the first line to the second line, then to the third line, and then he was kind of fighting for ice time. It kind of just happened out of nowhere, and I think that's largely what caught him off guard as well.
Speaking of that, after Monday's workout, Taylor Hall discussed the situation of being a healthy scratch on Saturday, and here's Taylor Hall's reaction and Luke Richardson's.
He thought it was best for me to just reset, and so that's what I'm going to do. I'm not immune to coaching, and I'm not immune to being held accountable. So just want to play better, want to be better for our team. And there's some things in my game that when I'm not playing well, Luke and the coaching staff, obviously just want me to do a bit better. So that's really it. We talked today, and I'm excited to play tomorrow.
Yeah, no, there's, that could be part of my problem too. Like, sometimes you give veterans a little bit more of a grace period, and I know he's been frustrated, and I don't want the frustration to lead too long. So it was a good time for just maybe a little setback. But for me to communicate with him, I need to get to know the player more to see how they like to handle that. And obviously we've talked lots. During and after, but maybe before. It needs to be more before. So that's just something that I learned about one player. But, I think he had a great practice today. And, part of my thought process was to have a couple of days like this just to kind of reset and go. And we hope it leads that way.
Do you feel like you two are on the same page now after the healthy conversation?
No, he was great today. He was great, and he's all in about being better for himself and for the team, and that's all a coach can ask for. So he's always been great like that. And I know nobody likes to get sat out or miss a game, no matter what the circumstances are. But for him, he's also a guy that's missed 8 or 9 months of playing games, and he's used to being at a high level. He holds himself there, and we think of him as that. So we're just trying to figure out a way to get him back there.
So, Charlie, kind of an interesting dynamic there. You've got a former number 1 overall pick, a former MVP who kind of wanted maybe some warning that being a healthy scratch was a possibility. And you gotta give it to Luke for kind of owning that and saying, yeah, okay, maybe I needed to give him a little more lead up to this. But again, you're talking about a team that is searching for answers offensively, and he just decided after a Seattle game where, there were several players of the Taylor Hall variety that were turning the puck over just inside the blue line. He decided to make Hall the example on Saturday, and then we heard the reaction to it. What was your takeaway kind of of how everything was presented on Monday.
Yeah, so let's contextualize all of this. So I think Taylor Hall has a right to be a little bit frustrated about the handling of the situation, because of course, if he had known that he was kind of teetering on being a guy that might be a healthy scratch soon, he would have liked that communication up front. And, it wasn't like, Taylor Hall is one of several Blackhawks that have been, Luke Richardson went out of his way to say he was the guy that was a healthy scratch, but there were 4, 5, 6 guys that easily could have been in that role. And it was kind of just Taylor Hall's turn. And I appreciated Luke's perspective as well of acknowledging his mistake and feeling like he should have been more upfront about the communication. At the same time, Luke Richardson probably is kind of not into the feelings business of how is this going to make him feel? How is it going to make him feel? Just with any healthy scratch, whether it was Kurashev or Reichel, it kind of just happened out of the blue, right? And so here's what I will say, and I know Luke is going to get dragged in the mud a little bit by the fan base who are just kind of looking for a reason to blame someone. And there was an example last season in March with the Philadelphia Flyers where John Tortorella, it was after a game, they had lost 4-1 against the New York Rangers. It was in Philly, and they were making a playoff push at the time. And Felix Sandstrom, who was a goaltender for the Flyers, ended up not playing well in the game. And Sandstrom is a younger goaltender, and the Flyers were in a playoff push, and they were in a tough spot because that was around the time when Carter Hart left the team because of all the stuff that was going on. And so they just weren't getting goaltending. After the game, John Tortorella was asked about the goaltending performance, and he was not happy about it. He had bad body language. And the next day he followed up to reporters and said, addressed it immediately and said, "Hey, I just want to apologize for the way I handled the situation yesterday. I had a conversation with the goaltender. We're on the same page now." And so that's from a media perspective, but also from a fan perspective, I think you like to see the coaches take ownership when they do make a mistake. I feel like I would have been a little bit more concerned if Luke kind of danced around it. And I will say this too, when Taylor Hall was a healthy scratch, after when Luke was explaining the decision, he didn't make it a big deal. He kind of teetered the line of performance-based, but also he's coming off the ACL injury. We want to get him some work. So this wasn't Luke going to the media and saying Taylor needs to be better. He hasn't performed the way we wanted to, and throwing him under the bus. I think Luke acknowledging his mistake of needing to communicate a little bit better with that to a veteran like Taylor Hall beforehand, I appreciated from a perspective. I think fans should too, even if they feel differently about how Luke Richardson has kind of handled it all this season.
Yeah, and I wonder if the schedule played a little bit into this. They played the game in Seattle on Thursday night. They traveled to Vancouver that night after the game, and then they were off on Friday, no practice. Usually the coaching staff, Luke, would make a decision on that Friday or the day before, like, okay, we're going to sit Taylor, and he wouldn't be wouldn't have a line. He'd be the odd man out, so to speak. And he would be told about that, obviously, the difficult conversation before practice on Friday. They didn't have that. Now, again, they're at the hotel. There's other opportunities. And you certainly, for a veteran of his ilk, you go out of your way to, give them a warning or heads up. You do them a solid, show them respect. So, maybe Taylor expected that on Friday if that's what was going to happen on Saturday. Instead, he found out at morning skate on Saturday. So I'm wondering if the logistics of the schedule played a role in this. At the end of the day, this is just a byproduct of a team that's not scoring, and it's bottom of the league in all the major offensive metrics. And what is he looking for from Taylor Hall? He wants to see Hall use that speed down that wing and shoot the puck and then retrieve it when need be. I could say that about a lot of people, including Connor Bedard, who we're going to talk about here in a couple minutes. But I think this is you make a good point. Like, people are looking for reasons to blame. As you take a step back, and you try to like look for answers. At least I was thinking about, how do you get out of this? They've tried every line combination. It's pretty much been a blender the entire year. There's really not any answers that pop off the page down in Rockford. I think this is a byproduct of just a rebuild being really tough. You can still acquire players like Connor Bedard with the first overall pick, and you can try to add veterans like Teuvo Teravainen and Tyler Bertuzzi, and think that is going to upgrade your team. But at the end of the day, this is a lengthy process, and the immediate answers are not out there. They really are still in Rockford, in juniors. They might even still be in the draft we're coming up on, next year's draft, or even the free agent market down the road.
For sure. And I shared this on the post-game show the other night too, because I was starting to get questions about Luke Richardson's job security. And even after this Taylor Hall situation, fans were already jumping to the conclusion, oh, he's lost the locker room. And it's like, man, that's such a stretch of I shake my head because, again, it's fans that are waiting for that opportunity to just kind of feel like, oh, Luke is the fall guy. But I bring this example up, and I was going through this kind of in real time doing the post-game show the other night about the Blackhawks roster last season. And a lot of the guys the Blackhawks had last year were borderline NHL players playing big minutes for the Blackhawks. And think about this list. So Jared Tenorti, Jacob Megna, Reese Johnson, Mackenzie Entwistle, all four of those players are playing in the AHL right now. They have not played an NHL game this season. Tyler Johnson, who was playing top 6 minutes for the Blackhawks last year, hopped on Boston on a PTO. He actually just recently signed with the Bruins on a 1-year veteran minimum deal with Boston. So he didn't even have a role with Boston at all for the first month of the season. Colin Blackwell signed on day 2 of free agency with the Dallas Stars, league minimum. Taylor Radish, a top 9 player for the Blackhawks last year, signed a $1 million contract with the Washington Capitals. And then Nikita Zaitsev is now in the KHL. And Rem Pitlick, who played a few games for the Blackhawks last year, hadn't even sniffed any AHL or NHL time this season. So a lot of the players last year that the Blackhawks had were borderline NHL players. And so you see the additions the Blackhawks made this year: Tyler Bertuzzi, Teuvo Teravainen, Pat Maroon, Craig Smith, Ilya Mikheyev. You look at those, you're like, wow, those are significant upgrades from the roster last year. But if you put the Blackhawks roster this year relative to the other NHL teams, it's like the Hawks have finally caught up to like a respectable NHL team. And we brought this example up. I think it was one of the first podcasts we've done, but when on the season debut of the Every Shift episode by the Blackhawks, in episode 1, at the very end of the episode, you have Luke Richardson, the coaching staff, Kyle Davidson, associate GM, Norm McIver. They're all in this room getting ready to project the opening night roster, and they're looking at this whiteboard. And Norm McIver, the associate general manager, is looking at the whiteboard, and this was his quote: "Where are the goals going to come from this year? If we want to be competitive, we got to significantly increase our goal production." And he's clicking a pen and he's laughing like we still need a significant upgrade in goal production before the Hawks had even hit the ice for the opening night. So that's why when people say, oh, Luke Richardson, he's his job security, his seat should be getting warm, he doesn't even have the players yet offensively to compete with some of these teams. So in some ways, I look at how competitive the Blackhawks have been in most games this season, and I'm like, that's impressive. But you look at some of the top players that aren't performing by the Blackhawks: Connor Bedard, Teravainen has slowed up, Tyler Bertuzzi, and so if Vancouver, like I see Elias Pettersson, he hasn't been producing for Vancouver. He's their top guy. But when Connor Bedard or Teuvo Teravainen aren't producing in Chicago, they don't have any depth that could really withstand the. So I know it's a long-winded answer, but I'm trying to contextualize where the Blackhawks are at in the rebuild, because it's not like they went into this season with playoff type expectations and they're significantly underperforming.
Right.
They've gotten better defensively. They're just having a hard time scoring goals, which they predicted before they even hit the ice for opening night roster.
And we tried to warn people at the beginning of the year, you're coming off a 52-point season. A huge step in the standings would be 25 points. That would be huge. And that would still put you 20 points at least out of the final playoff spot. So even if they made a big jump in points, which would have been around 25 or so, they still would have fallen 20 points out of the final wild card spot. So when you put it into perspective, like, they said that they wanted to make the next step and winning is now a priority and moral victories aren't acceptable. And that's all fine and good. But the reality of the situation was the step that they were going to be able to take or hopefully take was going to be a positive one, but it wasn't going to be this quantum jump into the playoff picture.
For sure. And, the Hawks scored 178 goals last season. The Blackhawks scored. Let's just say they scored 40 more goals this year compared to last year to put them out. Would it be 228 or 218 or whatever? That would still be fifth worst in the NHL last year. So even 40 extra goals is a significant increase in offensive production, and it still puts you in the bottom 5 of the NHL. So again, I think we have to put into perspective the expectations going into this team. If you would have told me going into this year, the Hawks had expectations to knock on the door of the playoffs, I would say, sure, they're underperforming. But we all agreed, we did this season preview podcast, and we were thinking like 72-ish points as a leap. And so they're kind of like on a pace to get near that. And so they're kind of performing to some expectations, maybe a little bit underperforming. But it's the top guys that are having a hard time producing, which I'm not overly concerned about with Connor Bedard specifically. And once they do break out of that offensive slump, I feel like they're going to get back to the level that we thought we were going to see from them.
And I think a lot of the issues stem from a lack of depth at the center position. And we're going to tell you the lines that were at practice on Monday. Usually we will see those the following night, their next game Tuesday against Anaheim at the United Center. So Connor Bedard was moved to left wing. Jason Dickinson, who's been a staple and the most consistent center on this team, on the third line, he's going to center the Bedard line with Joey Anderson on the right. Taylor Hall's going to draw back in after the healthy scratch. He's going to play the left wing on the second line with Donato at center, Mikheyev on the right side. Your third line now is going to be Kurashev, the captain Nick Foligno, and Teuvo Teravainen. And then it looks like the fourth line will be Bertuzzi, Reichel, Smith, with Maroon being the odd man out. So, when you look at this situation, don't you think a lot of it stems from, not having a solidified, let's just say, top 3 centers?
For sure. And I think that's why they were hoping that Andreas Athanasiou or Frank Nazar or someone would solidify the second line center position, because it would provide a little bit more balance. And, we've kind of beat the face-off thing to death too, but they just cannot win a draw. And so when you're not starting with possession, I think oftentimes the face-off numbers can be a little bit overblown, but at the same time, when you're that bad in the face-off circle, I mean, it does take, like I was watching the Vancouver game, the first 3 face-offs Vancouver took, man, I wrote it down, I don't have it with me, but the first 3 face-offs Vancouver took on the power play, it led to like a minute of offensive zone time. It was like 45 seconds on the second one and 35 seconds on the third one before the puck even cleared the zone. And so those are situational face-offs where you're like, man, it would be nice for the Blackhawks to win those face-offs. But specifically the Hawks' new lineup changes, we could talk about the balance or whatever. This to me is strictly Connor Bedard moving to the wing because we have to get him going. We have to free him up offensively. Let him not think as much. I don't want to say not think as much about the defensive side of the game, but just not about the defensive center type responsibilities. Because we've talked about it the last 4 games: 1 shot on goal, 1 shot on goal, 2 shots on goal, 1 shot. I mean, that's 5 shots on goal total in the last 4 games. That's just even the shot attempts have diminished significantly. And so this is a move by the Blackhawks where you're like, put him on a line with Jason Dickinson, who is the most responsible center on this Blackhawks team, and let Connor do what he needs to do. And Joey Anderson can be the puck retrieval guy. So we'll see if it frees up Connor. I think nobody is more driven to want to break out of this slump, the 9-game goal slump, than Connor Bedard. It's gotten to the point, Pat, where I'm like, I'm not even going near Connor until he breaks out of it, because that's how frustrated he is about his offensive production so far.
And to that point, let's get into his conversation with Scott Oake on Hockey Night in Canada on After Hours. This was after the 4-1 loss to the Canucks on Saturday night. First of all, I give him all the credit in the world for fulfilling that obligation, because, we knew that they teased that he was going to be the guest. And that's a big deal. Again, people sometimes don't, stateside know what that means. But to be the late night guest with Scott Oake after the nightcap game on Hockey Night in Canada, it's about a 20-25 minute conversation. The whole country's watching.
Right.
And obviously with all the pomp and circumstance around him and the discussion of him being a generational player and everything he did for Team Canada and did in Regina and, earned himself being the number 1 overall pick. And last year performing as the Rookie of the Year, a lot of attention and a tough game and a tough stretch for the Blackhawks. So afterwards, this is the conversation, and I want you to listen to the question that Scott asked Connor. What do you expect from yourself? And listen to what Connor had to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot more. It's been, tough start to the year, and not something I expected. I mean, I felt like I had a great summer and put a lot of work in, and you come in and it's been hard mentally, and it's been frustrating. So I just kind of try to stick with it and try to get better. We want to try to get better as a team, but I feel responsible for a lot of our struggles just with my game where it's at. It's not even close to where it should be or where it needs to be. So but you can't turn back the clock, can't go back to the start of the year. So just keep working and try to find it.
Wow, Charlie, you and I both separately listened to this interview, and I would invite people to check it out on YouTube. And thanks again to Sportsnet Hockey Night in Canada After Hours for that. He was, last week he was hard on himself, saying, it's been a rough start. I'm not generating like I was at the beginning of the season. In that soundbite with Scott Oake, he's taking responsibility almost on his shoulders for the Hawks' lack of offense and lack of success. And I thought, wow, that is a lot to put on one person, especially a 19-year-old.
Right. Like, you appreciate the fact that he cares so much and feels responsible for not just the offensive struggles by the Blackhawks, but just their overall record so far. Him saying it's not even close to where it should be. And this is coming off a summer, Pat, where he didn't do media interviews for months, So for him, he probably had all these expectations on himself where he was mentally in a much better spot because he was kind of freed up from all those obligations. Whereas last year it was the draft process, the draft in Chicago, going to the Stanley Cup final to do media stuff, then coming to Chicago to do development camp. It was just being pulled in all these different directions. So for him, he had a summer of getting to work on his game away from the spotlight, and then coming into the season and only having 3 goals. I'm sure he's really disappointed in himself, and credit to him for doing that. I mean, it's a 25-minute interview, and we've heard him after losses where he's really grumpy, right? I even think back to last year, his first NHL game in Pittsburgh. They win the hockey game. He takes a picture with the puck. It was his first NHL point because he picked up an assist, and he's smiling. The next day, they're in Boston. He scores his first career NHL goal, but it came in a loss. And afterwards, he takes a picture with the puck of the first NHL goal, and he is just stone-faced. Like, he was so mad about the loss, he didn't even care about the goal. And so for Connor to do this interview and to kind of, he probably put on a face for this interview because he knows that it's a big deal to be on Hockey Night in Canada. And he didn't want to come across as this guy that's grumpy or whatever.
And he didn't. So he really comported himself excellently. So kudos to him and whoever said to him, look, try and compartmentalize what's going on with you and the team and check the 9-game goalless drought at the door. Realize that, this is a primetime situation on national TV. And he really comported himself excellently.
Yeah, and credit to Scott Oake, too, for recognizing the situation. Like he said up front, he's like, it's your homecoming. I understand it didn't go the way you wanted it, to kind of preface it, not just saying, hey, thanks for doing this. This is great.
No, and Ron McLean and Biz, as they threw it to him, it was all under that same type of temperature where they were respectful, like, this is the last thing a player wants to do is talk about themselves when the team is struggling and the player is in a drought. But here's something I wanted to point out. And, we heard this from Gretzky on the TNT panel a couple of weeks ago when he was doing the Blackhawks Red Wing game. And he was talking specifically about Connor. And there's only like 4 or 5 people that know what it's like to be in Connor Bedard skates. It's probably like Sidney Crosby, Connor McDavid, and Wayne Gretzky, and a couple others, right? So we heard from Gretzky a couple of weeks ago trying to diffuse the situation a little bit and kind of take some of that pressure away from Connor. But Panger told a great story in the broadcast, and Tony Granato, who was a line mate of Wayne Gretzky's, echoed it on the postgame show. And they talked about when Gretzky was mired in a slump early in his career, John Muckler, his coach, went up to him and said, stop trying to do everything. I don't need you to get 5 points tonight. I don't need you to have 3 goals and, this and that. I need you to be special for one play. I want you to make a difference for one play. And Gretzky said, when he boiled it down to that, like, I need to do over 60 minutes, one thing special. All of a sudden, the 9-game goal drought, all these things that you're trying to do becomes a little more tolerable because your to-do list is one thing, right? And it's just to be special. And that might be an entry. That might be a retrieval. That might be a takeaway. It might be a secondary assist. Whatever it may be, just do one thing special. The other stuff will follow. And I was like, that's great advice. I hope, I hope that Connor and, he's got an awesome camp, an awesome support group with his mom and dad and his sister, that they could take, that clip from whether it's Panger talking about Gretzky or Gretzky himself on the set and say, look, this is the greatest hockey player that ever played. This is what he's saying to you. This is what he went through. He went through the exact same thing you're going through right now. And he obviously came out on the other side of it. So I just thought that was a cool story that might be, the catalyst to Connor, pulling himself out of the situation that he's in.
Yeah, it's a fine balance to walk, though, because you don't want to go to Connor and think, hey, be satisfied with where your game is at, just one, but you would think that advice would free him up to not put so much pressure on himself to score 3-4 points a night. I mean, how many times did we see it here in Chicago when Patrick Kane, it was the end of a game and you're like, man, Kane wasn't really at his best tonight, but he finished with 2 points because just on those 2 shifts, he did something that he produced for the Blackhawks, or he made a play, even though you looked at the scoring chances and they're like, oh, this was a game where scoring chances were 12-3 in favor of the opponent when Kane's line was on the ice, but he had 2 points because, he set someone up on power play, or it was one of those 3 scoring chances that his line was on the ice that he made a special play. So the Connor's going to get there. It's just hard to tell him that at 19 years of age because he expects so much of himself.
Yeah. And you know, the other thing too, I hope not only he, but other, like, you know, the Blackhawks have made a really strong commitment to the mental health side of things. I really hope that some of these players, whether they're upset with playing time or getting scratched or mired in a slump, whatever, that they're taking advantage of, you know, going to see these mental health experts and helping them cope with what they're dealing with on the ice, and more importantly, what they're dealing with it off the ice. Because in Connor's conversation on After Hours, he said it's been a mental struggle. And that's the first time I've heard him use those words. And, you know, it makes total sense that it would be, you know, a mental struggle. It'd be a mental struggle for anybody.
For sure. I even think of that Chicago Magazine article the other day where he was like, when I talk to my dad on the phone, it's about the game. When I talk to my mom, she wants to know how I'm feeling. So it's like this perfect balance of he's able to lean on his dad for some hockey advice because he knows his game better than anyone. And he's able to lean on his mom and his sister for kind of like emotional support and to make sure that he's in a good headspace mentally.
So, you know, he talked about his sister Madison on that After Hours interview about, you know, her being, you know, his idol and the person that he looks up to most. It was raw, real. It's Connor at his best, because Connor doesn't like talking about himself. So when he talks about his dad being a log, or what his mom means to him, or his sister Maddie and what she means to him, and how, you know, she makes sure he's crossing his T's and dotting his I's on all the emails he gets, you know, I'm guessing business related matters. I thought that was very cool. I thought it was cool to hear that, you know, he took an Uber home to North Vancouver and slept in his bed Thursday night going into Friday and just chilled at the house. And I joked on the set on Thursday night. I said, I wonder if he'll go to the spot on the driveway, just next to the driveway, where he's shot thousands and thousands and thousands, probably millions of pucks. And would he do that to find the mojo while he's home? Scott asked him, did you shoot any pucks? And he smiled. He said, yes, I did. I was like, of course you did, Connor. You would have it no other way.
I think back to the time, too, when Patrick Kane, I can't remember what playoffs it was. Patrick Kane was in a fairly significant goal drought in the playoffs. I think it was like 9 or 10 games in a row he hadn't scored. And Kane said, I was going back to some of my old YouTube clips and I was watching highlights of myself because I needed to remind myself of the player that I am. And I'm like, you're Patrick Kane. Like, you struggle with the comp. He reached a point where he was kind of battling confidence issues. And I'm not saying Connor Bedard is battling confidence, but maybe just that psychological doubt is kind of creeps in where, and even the play, the empty netter where he whiffs on the clear or on the dump and attempt. It's like, man, even something like that, I'm sure kind of is just like, man, when it rains, it pours. And so you want to make sure that he's still in a good space or headspace mentally. But I'm sure it probably felt really good for him to just go back home, have a night with the family, away from the spotlight, shoot some pucks in the backyard like he has as a kid and like he did probably all summer. And man, I would be surprised if he doesn't break out of this soon. And I would be surprised if he doesn't break out of this in a big way too.
Well, Anaheim's next on the schedule. And the last time they played the Ducks, the Hawks won that game 4-2. And in that contest, they had 2 power play goals, and Connor Bedard had 3 primary assists. Now, I do remember talking to him when he got home. He didn't really want to talk too much about the 3 primary assists, but he'll take 3 primary assists on Tuesday night if that's the way things shake down. Then it's the Stanley Cup champion Panthers at the United Center on Thursday, and then a quick trip to Philadelphia for a great noon start on Saturday. And the update on Seth Jones is really there is no timeline. It sounds like a broken foot or a broken bone or something in that right foot. We're waiting for the definitive diagnosis, but he's a he obviously eats up the most minutes on this team, one of the most in the National Hockey League. So guys like Connor Murphy, Alex Vlasic are going to have to pick up the slack along with Martinez and others.
Yeah. For all the flack that Seth Jones gets in this market, just because of the circumstances that he arrived here, being acquired by the old regime and then being given a long 8-year contract with a $9.5 million cap hit, full no move clause. When he's out of the lineup, you realize how big of a void that is, because he eats so many minutes, so many important minutes, where there isn't one player that just steps into that role. It's hey, all three pairings have to step up. And so I think it was even evident in the numbers. If you look at last year in the 15 games that Seth Jones missed, Hawks were 3-11-1 in those 15 games, and they scored 31 goals in their 15 games, so barely above 2 goals per game. And their goal differential in those games, -30, which was the worst in the NHL over that stretch. So again, you take away a guy that can eat 25, 26, 27 minutes a night from the lineup, massive loss. And you hope for Chicago's sake that it's not going to be too long term. He is going to miss at least 7 days because he is on IR, but you hope that it's not too much longer after that.
All right. Anything as we exit stage right, other than let's see some goals finally go in the net? It's hard to win games 1-0 in this league.
Yeah, man, it would be really nice for the Blackhawks against Anaheim to not just win, but for them to score like 5 goals. Because that would be, remember that a few years ago when the Hawks were having a really hard time scoring goals out of the gate. Then they came home against Vancouver. They tweaked something in the system against Vancouver. I remember it like it was yesterday. And they scored like 6 goals in a win. And it was like, oh, everything's great again. Like everyone got their cookies. Like life. I think the Hawks really need a game like that. Not really like a 2-1 grindy win. No. They need an offensive explosion kind of win to free up everybody.
Well, we'll see if that happens Tuesday night. Game time 7:30. Pregame show starts at 7 on CHSN and WGN Radio. That's going to do it for Charlie Roumeliotis. I'm Pat Boyle. Thanks for watching the Blackhawks Breakaway Podcast on CHSN, and we'll catch you next time.